For 30 years, I trusted my wife completely with our family's finances. Every month, I handed over my paycheck to Margaret, believing she was managing our money wisely, saving for our children's future, building the secure life we'd always dreamed of. But when I discovered the truth at age 78, that she'd been secretly gambling away our savings for decades while I worked myself to the bone, I realized that the woman I'd shared my life with had been living a lie that destroyed everything we'd built together. Good morning, dear viewers. My name is Frank. I'm 78 years old, and today I'm sharing a story from my life that I've kept secret for a long time. Before I begin, if you're watching now, please give this video a thumbs up, subscribe to the channel, and let me know in the comments where you're watching from. It helps me continue sharing my stories with you all. Let's go back to 1968. I was 22 when I met Margaret at a church social in Detroit. She was 20, beautiful, with blonde hair and blue eyes that sparkled when she laughed. I was working as a machinist at Ford, good steady work with decent pay and benefits. Margaret worked as a secretary at a law firm downtown. Back then, that was considered a respectable job for a young woman. We dated for 8 months before I proposed, and we married in the spring of 1969. Our early years were typical of young couples in those days. We rented a small apartment on the east side of Detroit, saved every penny we could, dreamed of buying our own house and starting a family. Margaret seemed so responsible with money. She kept detailed records in a little notebook, always knew exactly how much we had in the bank, never spent frivolously. "Frank," she'd say, "we need to save for our future. Every dollar matters." I admired her discipline, her planning. It made me feel secure knowing our money was in such capable hands. In 1971, our first child, Robert, was born. 2 years later came Susan, and in 1975, our youngest, Michael. With 3 children and a mortgage on the house we'd finally bought, money was tight, but Margaret assured me we were managing fine. She handled all the bills, all the banking, all the financial planning. I just worked and handed over my paycheck every 2 weeks. "You work hard enough, Frank," she'd say. "Let me worry about the money." And I did let her worry about it. Completely. I trusted her judgment, trusted her love for our family, trusted that she was making the right decisions for our future. Looking back now, I realize how naive I was, how completely I abdicated responsibility for understanding our financial situation. But that's how many marriages worked in those days. The husband earned, the wife managed the household, and you trusted each other completely. Margaret always seemed to have everything under control. The bills were paid on time. The children were fed and clothed. We weren't wealthy, but we weren't struggling either, or so I thought. When the children needed school supplies or new clothes, Margaret would find the money somewhere. When the car needed repairs, somehow we could afford it. I assumed we were living within our means, maybe even saving a little for the future. It was around 1978, when we'd been married 9 years, that I first noticed something strange about Margaret's routine. Every Wednesday afternoon, she would take the car and disappear for several hours. When I asked where she'd been, she'd always have a ready explanation. "Grocery shopping," she'd say, or visiting my sister, or running errands for the children. The explanations were always plausible, always reasonable. But I began to notice that she often came home empty, handed from these supposed shopping trips, or that she'd claimed to visit her sister when her sister later mentioned not seeing her in weeks. One Wednesday, I decided to come home early from work, thinking I'd surprise her and maybe we could spend some time together while the children were at school. But Margaret wasn't home. The car was gone, and there was no note explaining where she'd gone. When she returned that evening, I asked casually where she'd been. "Shopping?" she said quickly, avoiding my eyes. The stores were crowded. I didn't find anything worth buying, but I'd driven past our usual shopping areas on my way home, and I hadn't seen our car anywhere. It was a small lie, seemingly insignificant, but it planted a seed of doubt that began to grow slowly in my mind. Over the next few months, I paid more attention to Margaret's Wednesday afternoon disappearances. Sometimes she'd be gone for 5 or 6 hours. returning home just before the children got out of school. Sometimes she'd come home excited, almost euphoric, talking quickly about her day, full of energy. Other times, she'd return quiet and withdrawn, claiming she had a headache and needed to lie down. In 1980, we faced our first real financial crisis. The transmission went out in our car, and the repair bill was $800, a significant amount for us in those days. When I suggested we pay it from our savings account, Margaret became agitated. "We can't touch the savings," she said firmly. "That's for emergencies only." But this was an emergency, I pointed out. We needed the car for me to get to work, for her to get the children to school and medical appointments. Margaret insisted we take out a loan instead. It seemed odd to pay interest on a loan when we had savings earning much less in the bank, but I trusted her judgment. She understood our finances better than I did, I reasoned. She must have had a good reason for wanting to preserve our savings. The loan payments strained our budget, but we managed. What I didn't realize was that there were no savings to touch. Margaret had been spending every extra dollar we had, and I was completely unaware of it. The financial pressure on our household increased over the next few years. I started working overtime whenever it was available, bringing home bigger paychecks to help ease the strain. But somehow, no matter how much extra I earned, we never seemed to get ahead. Margaret would always find expenses that absorbed the additional income. "The children are growing so fast," she'd say. "Everything costs more these days. It's not your fault, Frank. It's just expensive to raise a family." In 1983, something happened that should have opened my eyes, but I was still too trusting to see the truth. Margaret came home from one of her Wednesday outings in an unusually good mood. She was practically glowing with excitement. "Frank," she said, "I have wonderful news. I won a contest at the grocery store. $500. She showed me 5 $100 bills, crisp and new. It seemed like a miracle, coming at a time when we were particularly strapped for cash. We used the money to catch up on some overdue bills and buy the children some clothes they desperately needed. I thanked God for the blessing and didn't question the story further. But over the next few months, there were several more contests and lucky breaks. Margaret would come home with varying amounts of cash, sometimes $200, sometimes $800, once even $100 and $500. Each time she had a story about where the money came from. A scratch-off lottery ticket, a radio call in contest, a rebate she'd forgotten about, a small inheritance from a distant relative. The stories were always different, but they were delivered with such conviction, such detail, that I believed them all. Margaret seemed to have extraordinary luck, I thought. She was always in the right place at the right time, always managing to find these unexpected windfalls just when we needed them most. What I didn't realize was that Margaret was gambling, and the money she brought home represented her winnings, not her losses. For every dollar she triumphantly displayed, she was secretly losing 10 or 20 or 50 more. I was seeing only the peaks, not the devastating valleys of her gambling addiction. The pattern continued for years. Margaret's Wednesday disappearances became more frequent, sometimes extending to other days of the week. She began making excuses to go out in the evenings, too. "I need to run to the store," she'd say after dinner, and then be gone for hours. When I'd ask about her long absence, she'd claim the lines were long, or she'd run into an old friend, or she'd had to go to several stores to find what she needed. By 1988, our 20th year of marriage, I was working almost constant overtime just to keep up with our expenses. We never seemed to have any money saved, despite my substantial income from Ford. Margaret explained this by pointing to the cost of raising 3 teenagers, the mortgage, the constant stream of car repairs and household expenses. "We're not poor, Frank," she'd say. "We're just normal. Most families live paycheck to paycheck these days." I believed her because I wanted to believe her, because I trusted her, because I couldn't imagine that the woman I loved could be deceiving me so completely. The first real crack in my trust came in 1992, when Robert was preparing to start college. We'd always talked about being able to help our children with their education, and I assumed we had at least some college savings set aside. When Robert was accepted to the University of Michigan, I asked Margaret about accessing our savings to help with tuition. Her reaction was immediate and extreme. "We don't have college savings, Frank," she snapped. "How could we save for college? We barely make ends meet as it is." But I remembered years of overtime paychecks, years of her assuring me we were managing our money well, years of believing we were building something for our children's future. "What about all those windfalls you had?" I asked. "The contest winnings, the lottery tickets. Surely we saved some of that money." Margaret became defensive, almost angry. "That money went to bills, Frank, to keeping this family afloat. Do you think raising 3 children is cheap? Do you think this house maintains itself?" Her anger silenced my questions, but it didn't silence my growing doubts. I began paying more attention to our financial situation, looking more carefully at the bills and statements that came in the mail. What I found confused me more than it alarmed me initially. Credit card statements showing balances I didn't remember accumulating. Bank statements showing a checking account balance much lower than I'd expected. When I asked Margaret about these discrepancies, she always had explanations. The credit card balance was from Christmas presents for the children. The low bank balance was because she'd paid several large bills all at once. She'd shuffle papers around, show me receipts, explain the numbers in ways that made them seem reasonable. I wanted to believe her explanations because the alternative, that my wife of over 20 years was lying to me about money, was too painful to accept. In 1994, I experienced something that should have been a wake-up call but wasn't. I received a bonus at work, a substantial one, $2,000 for a safety suggestion that had been implemented factory-wide. I was excited about the bonus, already making plans for how we could use it. Maybe we could finally take a family vacation or put some money aside for Susan's college fund. When I told Margaret about the bonus, her reaction was strange. Instead of excitement, I saw something that looked almost like calculation in her eyes, as if she was already figuring out how to access and spend this money. "That's wonderful, Frank," she said, but her tone was flat, distracted. "We should put it directly into the savings account. Keep it safe." But a week later, when I asked to see our savings account balance, Margaret became evasive. "Why do you need to see it?" she asked. "Don't you trust me to handle our money properly?" The question stung because of course I trusted her, or I had trusted her. But the doubt was growing stronger now, fed by years of small inconsistencies, unexplained absences, and financial stress that never seemed to ease no matter how hard I worked. It was in the spring of 1996 that I made a decision that would change everything. Margaret had gone on one of her mysterious errands, claiming she needed to shop for Susan's graduation dress. She'd been gone for 6 hours, and when she returned, she had no dress, no shopping bags, nothing to show for her long absence. "I couldn't find anything appropriate," she said, avoiding my eyes. "I'll try again tomorrow." That night, after Margaret had gone to bed, I did something I'd never done in 27 years of marriage. I went through her purse. My hands were shaking as I opened it, feeling like a spy in my own home. Inside, I found something that confused me initially: several business cards from places I'd never heard of. Lucky Sevens Casino, Riverside Gaming, Motor City Gaming Hall. At first, I thought maybe she was planning a surprise for our anniversary, maybe a night out at one of the casinos for entertainment. But there were so many cards, from so many different places, and some of them were worn from handling. I put the purse back exactly as I'd found it and went to bed with my mind racing. The next day, I did something else I'd never done. I took a half-day off work and followed Margaret when she left the house for her afternoon errands. I felt terrible doing it, felt like I was betraying her trust, but I needed to know the truth. I followed her car at a distance, my heart pounding with anxiety and guilt. Margaret drove directly to a large building I'd passed many times but never paid attention to, the Lucky Sevens Casino. I watched from the parking lot as she walked confidently through the front doors, obviously familiar with the place. I sat in my car for over an hour, trying to process what I'd seen. My wife, the woman who'd always been so careful with money, so concerned about our family's financial security, was gambling. I didn't go inside that day. I drove home in a daze, trying to understand what this discovery meant for our marriage, our family, our future. When Margaret returned that evening, empty-handed once again, I didn't confront her. I wasn't ready. I needed time to think, to plan, to figure out how extensive this problem really was. Over the next several weeks, I began investigating our financial situation more thoroughly. I requested copies of our bank statements going back several years, something I'd never done before because I'd always trusted Margaret to handle these details. What I found was devastating. Our checking account had been chronically overdrawn, saved from bounced checks only by automatic transfers from a line of credit I didn't know we had. Our credit cards were maxed out. The savings account I thought contained several $1,000s had a balance of $47. We were, in essence, broke, living on borrowed money, and my current paycheck with no cushion for emergencies. But the most shocking discovery came when I found records of cash advances, hundreds of them over the years, each for $200 or $500 or $1,000. The pattern was clear now. Margaret had been taking cash advances on our credit cards and using that money to gamble. When she won, she'd bring home cash and claim it was from contests or luck. When she lost, which was obviously most of the time, we simply accumulated more debt. All those windfalls she'd celebrated over the years represented only a tiny fraction of what she'd actually been gambling away. I calculated that over the past decade, she'd taken more than $150,000 in cash advances, money that had disappeared into slot machines and card tables. Armed with this information, I finally confronted Margaret. It was a Tuesday evening in June 1996. The children were all out with friends, and Margaret was in the kitchen preparing dinner, humming softly to herself, apparently without a care in the world. "Margaret," I said, my voice shaking with anger and hurt. "Why need to talk?" She looked up from the stove, and immediately her expression changed. Perhaps she saw something in my face that warned her this wasn't going to be an ordinary conversation. "What about, Frank? About where our money has been going for the past 27 years? About the gambling? About the lies?" The color drained from Margaret's face. She set down the wooden spoon she'd been holding and leaned against the counter as if she needed support. "I don't know what you're talking about," she said weakly, but we both knew the denial was useless. "I followed you, Margaret. I saw you go into the casino. I've seen the bank statements, the cash advances, the credit card bills. I know what you've been doing." For a moment, she just stared at me, and I could see her calculating, trying to decide whether to continue lying or finally tell the truth. Then, suddenly, she collapsed into a chair and began to cry. "I'm sorry, Frank," she sobbed. "I'm so sorry. I never meant for it to get this bad. It started so small, just a few dollars here and there. I thought I could control it, thought I could win back what I lost." The confession that followed was devastating. Margaret had started gambling in 1975, just occasional visits to the racetrack with a friend from work. But it had escalated quickly. The racetrack became casinos. A few dollars became hundreds. Occasional visits became regular habits. She'd been hiding the extent of her gambling from me for over 20 years, funding her addiction with cash advances, credit cards, and every spare dollar from our household budget. "Where did you think this would lead?" I asked, trying to keep my voice calm. "Did you think I'd never find out? Did you think we could live on debt forever?" Margaret's answer revealed the depth of her delusion. "I kept thinking I'd hit a big jackpot," she said. "One big win that would pay back everything I'd lost and give us money left over. I was trying to fix it, Frank. I was trying to win back what I'd taken from our family." The logic was insane, but I could hear the desperation in her voice, the genuine belief that gambling more would somehow solve the problem gambling had created. "Do you realize what you've done to our children?" I asked. "Robert couldn't go to his first choice college because we had no savings. Susan has been working part-time since she was 16 to buy her own clothes because we told her money was tight. Michael sees his friends going on vacations and getting new things while we tell him we can't afford it. All while you were throwing away thousands of dollars at casinos. Margaret's crying intensified. "I know," she whispered. "I know I've hurt everyone, but I couldn't stop. Every time I tried to quit, something would happen. A bill would come due, or one of the kids would need something expensive, and I'd think maybe if I just went once more, maybe I could win enough to cover it." The conversation continued for hours. Margaret admitted that the contest winnings and lucky breaks she'd brought home over the years represented less than 5% of what she'd actually lost gambling. For every dollar she'd celebrated, she'd lost 20 or 30 more. The euphoric moods I'd noticed when she returned from her gambling sessions were from small wins that she'd foolishly believed meant she was due for a bigger win. The depression and withdrawal were from the much more frequent losses that left her deeper in debt and more desperate to win it back. "How much?" I asked. "In total, how much have you lost?" Margaret's answer hit me like a physical blow. "I don't know exactly. Maybe $200,000 over all these years." $200,000. More than most people made in 4 or 5 years. Gone forever. Money that could have paid for our children's college educations, could have given us a comfortable retirement, could have provided the security and stability every family deserves. Instead, it had been fed into machines and lost at tables, chasing the impossible dream of getting rich quick. That night, I barely slept. I lay next to Margaret, the woman I'd loved and trusted for 27 years, and wondered if I'd ever really known her at all. The woman I'd married had been responsible and frugal. The woman in my bed was someone else entirely, someone who'd been lying to me every day for over 2 decades, someone who'd risked our family's future to feed her addiction. The next morning, I took another day off work and went to see our bank's loan officer. I needed to understand exactly how bad our financial situation really was. The meeting was humbling and terrifying. We owed more than $80,000 on various credit cards and lines of credit. Our mortgage had just over $40,000 remaining, but that was the only debt that was secured by an asset of value. Our home was worth about $85,000, which meant we had roughly $45,000 in equity, the only positive number in our entire financial picture. "Mr. Patterson," the loan officer said gently, "I have to ask, are you aware of how your family has been spending money? These cash advances suggest a serious problem." I explained about Margaret's gambling, feeling ashamed and embarrassed to admit that I'd been completely unaware of my wife's addiction for so long. The loan officer was sympathetic but realistic. "You need professional help," he said, "both financial counseling and addiction counseling. And you need to take control of your finances immediately. Cancel all the credit cards, close the lines of credit. Make sure your wife can't access any more funds for gambling." When I returned home, I found Margaret sitting at the kitchen table, still in her bathrobe, staring at nothing. She looked like she hadn't slept at all. "I'm going to get help, Frank," she said without looking up. "I called Gamblers Anonymous this morning. There's a meeting tonight." I wanted to feel hopeful, but I was too angry, too hurt, too shocked to feel anything positive. "It's too late for help," I said harshly. 20 years too late. You've destroyed our finances, lied to me and the children, risked everything we worked for. How am I supposed to trust anything you say now? Margaret finally looked at me, and I saw something I'd never seen in her eyes before, genuine fear. "Please don't leave me, Frank. Please don't break up our family. I know I've made terrible mistakes, but I love you. I love our children. I can get better, love," I said. "If you loved us, you wouldn't have gambled away our children's future. If you loved us, you wouldn't have lied to me every day for 20 years. The weeks that followed were the darkest of my life. Margaret did start attending Gamblers Anonymous meetings, and I went to a few spouse support meetings, but I was too angry to participate constructively. I took complete control of our finances, canceling credit cards, closing accounts, giving Margaret only small amounts of cash for genuine necessities. She accepted these restrictions without complaint, which somehow made me even angrier. If she could accept such strict controls now, why couldn't she have controlled herself before destroying our financial security? Our children knew something was wrong, but we tried to shield them from the details. Robert was away at college, working multiple jobs to pay his expenses while I tried to help as much as our limited budget allowed. Susan and Michael still lived at home, and they could feel the tension between Margaret and me even though we tried to hide it. In August 1996, I made a decision that surprised everyone, including myself. I decided not to leave Margaret. Not because I'd forgiven her, and certainly not because I trusted her, but because I realized that breaking up our family would only make our financial situation worse. 2 households would cost more than one. Child support and alimony would strain my income even further. And despite everything she'd done, Margaret was still the mother of my children, and they needed stability during this crisis. "I'm staying," I told her one evening, "but things are going to be different. You will never touch our money again. You will account for every hour of your time. You will continue going to meetings and counseling. And if you gamble even $1, I'm gone and taking the children with me." Margaret agreed to every condition eagerly, desperately. She got a job at a grocery store, partly to help with our finances and partly to keep her busy during the hours when she might be tempted to gamble. She attended Gamblers Anonymous meetings religiously. She submitted to my financial control without complaint. But the damage was done. The trust that had been the foundation of our marriage was destroyed. I watched her constantly, questioned her absences, monitored her behavior for signs of relapse. It was exhausting for both of us, living under constant surveillance and suspicion. Our relationship became more like warden and prisoner than husband and wife. Over the next several years, we slowly began to recover financially. I worked overtime whenever possible. Margaret's salary from the grocery store helped, though it was modest. We lived on a strict budget, paying off credit cards one by one. By 2000, we'd managed to pay off most of our debt, though we still had no savings and were years behind where we should have been in preparing for retirement. Margaret seemed to be successfully managing her gambling addiction, though I never fully trusted her recovery. There were times when she'd be late coming home from work, and I'd feel panic rising in my chest until she walked through the door with a reasonable explanation for her delay. The children grew up and moved on with their lives, mostly unaware of the financial crisis their mother's gambling had created. Robert graduated from college with significant student loan debt that could have been avoided if we'd had the college savings we should have accumulated. Susan chose a local community college, partly for financial reasons, though she eventually transferred to a 4-year school and earned her degree. Michael, our youngest, was the most affected. By the time he was ready for college in 1997, our finances were still recovering, and he had to work his way through school almost entirely on his own. In 2003, I discovered something that shattered the fragile peace we'd built over the previous 7 years. Margaret had been secretly buying lottery tickets with money she skimmed from the grocery budget. It was a small amount, maybe $20 or $30 a month, but it represented everything I'd feared. She was still gambling, still lying, still unable to completely overcome her addiction. When I confronted her with the lottery tickets I'd found hidden in her car, she broke down completely. "I'm sorry, Frank. I thought I could handle just the lottery. I haven't been to a casino in years. It's just a few dollars here and there." But it wasn't just a few dollars here and there. It was proof that Margaret would never be completely trustworthy with money, that her addiction was always lurking beneath the surface, waiting for an opportunity to resurface. It was proof that the woman I'd married, the responsible woman who'd once managed our finances so carefully, was gone forever, replaced by someone who would always be tempted to risk our security for the impossible dream of easy money. I realized then that I could never again relax my vigilance, never again trust Margaret to have access to significant amounts of money, never again feel secure about our financial future. Margaret returned to intensive counseling, and the lottery ticket purchases stopped as far as I knew. but the damage to our relationship was irreparable. We continued living together, but we were essentially financial roommates rather than true partners. I handled all money matters, gave Margaret a small weekly allowance for personal expenses, and maintained complete control over our financial accounts. It was a functional arrangement, but it wasn't a marriage in any meaningful sense. The love, trust, and partnership that had once defined our relationship had been consumed by Margaret's addiction and the years of deception that had hidden it. Now, at 78, I look back on 53 years of marriage and wonder what might have been. Margaret is 76, and to outside observers, we probably look like a typical elderly couple who've weathered life's storms together. But I know the truth. I know that the financial security we should have built over 30 years of hard work was gambled away in casinos and lost to addiction. I know that our children paid the price for their mother's compulsion, working harder and accepting less than they should have needed to. I know that the trust that should be the bedrock of any marriage was shattered by decades of lies and financial betrayal. Margaret has been gambling free for over 15 years now, as far as I know, but I still watch her carefully. I still control our finances completely. I still feel a knot in my stomach when she's late coming home from errands. The addiction may be under control, but the damage it caused to our relationship can never be fully repaired. She often expresses remorse for what she did to our family, and I believe her regret is genuine. But regret doesn't restore the hundreds of thousands of dollars she lost. Regret doesn't give our children the educational opportunities they deserved. Regret doesn't give us the comfortable retirement we should have been able to enjoy. If I could speak to my younger self, the trusting husband who handed over his paycheck every 2 weeks without question, I would say, pay attention to your family's finances. Don't abdicate responsibility for understanding where your money goes. Trust, but verify. Love doesn't mean blind faith, and partnership means both people should understand and participate in major decisions, especially financial ones. The signs of Margaret's gambling addiction were there for years. The mysterious absences, the inconsistent stories about money, the periods of euphoria followed by depression, the constant financial stress despite adequate income. I ignored these signs because I wanted to trust, because I wanted to believe, because I couldn't imagine that someone I loved could deceive me so completely. The greatest tragedy is not just the money that was lost, but the time that was wasted, the years I spent working overtime to cover gambling losses that I didn't know existed, the family vacations we never took because we couldn't afford them, while Margaret was losing thousands at casinos, the Christmas mornings when we told our children we had to be frugal, while their mother was secretly gambling away money that could have made those holidays special. The college dreams that were abandoned, the opportunities that were lost, the security that was sacrificed, all to feed an addiction that stole not just our money, but our peace of mind and our family's future. At 78, I'm still working part-time because we don't have adequate retirement savings. Margaret and I live modestly, carefully budgeting every dollar, still paying off the last remnants of debt from her gambling years. Our children are successful adults who've built good lives despite the financial obstacles their mother's addiction created. But I wonder sometimes what they might have achieved if they'd had the educational and financial support they deserved. The most painful part is knowing that all of it, the financial stress, the family tensions, the lost opportunities, the broken trust, was completely preventable. If Margaret had sought help when her gambling first became problematic, if I had been more aware of our financial situation, if either of us had recognized the warning signs of addiction before it consumed our family's resources, our lives could have been completely different. But perhaps the greatest lesson I've learned is that addiction doesn't just hurt the addict, it devastates entire families. Margaret's gambling addiction didn't just steal money from casino tables, it stole dreams from our children, stole security from our marriage, stole the future we'd planned and worked toward for decades. Recovery is possible, but some damage can never be fully undone. Some trust, once broken, can never be completely restored. Some opportunities once lost never come again. My story is a cautionary tale about the hidden costs of addiction, the danger of financial secrecy in marriage, and the importance of facing problems honestly before they destroy everything you've worked to build. If you're watching this and you recognize signs of gambling addiction in someone you love, don't wait. Get help immediately. Don't trust that they can control it on their own. Don't believe promises that will never happen again. Don't enable the behavior by covering for them or making excuses. Addiction is a disease that requires professional treatment and ongoing vigilance. The earlier it's addressed, the less damage it will cause to the addict and their family. But if you wait too long, if you ignore the signs and trust blindly like I did, you may wake up one day to discover that the life you thought you were building has been gambled away, one bet at a time, one lie at a time, one broken promise at a time. And to those who might be struggling with gambling addiction themselves, the house always wins. The casino doesn't exist to make you rich, it exists to take your money. Every jackpot you see, every winner you witness, represents hundreds or thousands of losers whose money paid for that win. The odds are mathematically stacked against you, and no system, no strategy, no amount of luck will change that fundamental reality. The only way to win is not to play. The only way to protect your family's future is to seek help before gambling destroys it. The excitement, the thrill, the hope of winning big, none of it is worth the devastation that gambling addiction brings to families like mine.